You're qualified. You know you're qualified. You have the experience, you have the skills, you went to school for this. You can do this job. But you keep wondering, why is it that I'm not being called in for interviews? My name is Kim. I am a big tech recruiter as well as a career advancement expert. I help professionals land higher paying jobs without stress or confusion. The fact is that in today's job market, or really any job market, the biggest question in the hiring process for candidates is, why wasn't I pushed forward in the process? Now, as someone who sits on the other side of the screen after you click apply to job, I can tell you that there are three scenarios that I often see are the reason why candidates aren't moved forward in the process. Now, this is just for my own personal experience, but I will walk you through those and talk about ways that you can navigate those moving forward. So, let's get started. The first reason is that your resume is just not doing you any justice. The thing is, people will submit a resume and they'll think, oh, this is great. But then when they're not getting any callbacks, that should give you reason to pause. You see, you may be qualified, but the resume isn't clearly stating that. The hard thing about any part of the job search process is that you, as the job seeker, need to be able to articulate concisely and clearly your previous experience and your accomplishments to multiple people who were not there at your previous role. That's not an easy thing to do. And it oftentimes trips people up when they are constructing a resume. So when you apply to jobs, try to connect the dots as easily as possible. What I mean by that is, even if it's obvious to you that you clearly have been doing this job for such a long time, if you have alternative job title names, or if the experience you have is from a more generalist type of experience as opposed to more of a specialist type of work, it may not be obvious to the person reading the resume. So make sure that you are really showcasing those skills, accomplishments, achievements, things that really indicate I meet these qualifications and exceed them so that it's easy to see it. It's also worth noting here that resume is passed on to a hiring manager. So not only does the resume need to get past the recruiter, but it also needs to be okayed by the hiring manager before any other interview activities take place. Another thing to keep in mind is that most major employers allow you to build out a candidate profile, which is such a great time saver. However, if you apply to a job in 2022 and are applying for a similar role this year, your resume is probably going to look a little bit different. A role that you weren't qualified for in 2022, you probably are qualified for now, but it doesn't reflect that because the resume in the application is 4 years old. I know that sounds so silly, but folks, this happens a lot. Make sure that what you provide in your application is the most up to date information. I promise you, that is something that trips people up way more than you think. Now, this next one might hurt a little. And I recognize that this might not be something that you want to hear, but not all candidates who believe that they're qualified are actually qualified. Perfect example. I was hiring for a production supervisor role, and I received so many applicants that were production supervisors within the media, not within manufacturing. And I was hiring in manufacturing. So just because it appears like you meet the basic qualifications, sometimes it's a bit of a miss. I also know that there is a school of thought where, you should apply to jobs anyway. My mom always said, let them tell you no. So by all means, apply to a job if that's of interest to you and you want that job. But I will warn you, especially in today's job market, aspirational career moves are far more difficult than lateral moves. And so, while there's a lot of great advice and encouragement out there that says to apply to jobs, even if you don't meet all of the basic qualifications, if you use that strategy, just be aware that you may be investing time into job applications that are not going to yield results as opposed to roles where it's more of a lateral move for you professionally. You can utilize your time however you like, but as someone who receives the applications, I have to do my due diligence to make sure that candidates at least meet the basic qualifications in order to be considered, or else it's not fair to the rest of the candidates. The third reason that someone might not move forward in the process is it actually doesn't have anything to do with you as the candidate. You see, you probably are very qualified, but there were other factors in play that unfortunately led the team to hire another person. You may have applied to a job and that hiring team already had candidates in play, so it did not make sense to engage with brand new candidates when it was very likely that one of the handful of folks they already had interviewing was going to be offered that job. I remember once when I was looking for work, it was just after I had lost my job at a very small startup, and it was the winter holidays. And folks, I had no money. I had no money. And I just desperately needed any sort of a job. So I applied for a holiday retail position and drove to the mall and went in for my interview. I had only been called in and scheduled that interview the day before. So between that day and the day that I drove into the mall, that position had literally just been filled with the person they interviewed right before me. Folks, I was devastated. I was so devastated. I went back into my car in the mall parking lot and cried because I thought, what am I going to do? So I know what it feels like. With that in mind, let's talk about the things that we can control. We cannot control what the basic qualifications are for a job. We can't control whether they've gone with an internal candidate or extended an offer to someone else or eliminated the job altogether. What we can control is our messaging and our follow up to our application. So, what does this mean for you? You want to take a look at your resume with fresh eyes. Ask yourself, does this clearly, without question, communicate that I am not only qualified for this job, meaning meets the basic qualifications for this role, but also that I can achieve results? Are the examples that I'm sharing in my resume relevant examples to the position that I'm applying to? Am I making a solid connection between the work that I was doing, or am I forcing them to make a leap? Remember, you were the one that had the lived experience. So it's easy for you to make that connection. But the recruiter, the hiring manager, and the other interviewers were not there. So you sometimes need to spell things out a little bit more prescriptively than if you were just sharing the story with a friend. And then once you've submitted an application, are you following up? Maybe you were a referral to that company, or you know someone who works there, or you've done an informational interview, or possibly the career center where you went to college has a connection at that company and they might be able to facilitate an introduction. I know it feels like a long shot, but the follow up really does show that you have a continued interest. So then, even if, let's just say, a role is filled by another candidate, you now have a connection and you could be playing the long game if they have any new roles coming available. So, if you've been applying to jobs and you know that you're qualified and you're not getting any callbacks, just remember that it's very possible that this has nothing to do with you. And so do your best not to take it personally. I know it's easy for me to say that, but I promise you, I have been there and I know how it feels. But instead of focusing on the things that you can't control, of which honestly, in any part of this interview process, most things you can't control, invest your energy in the things that you know that you can control, which is being able to clearly communicate through your resume and your follow up and even your interviews. Save that for a later video. Being able to communicate that you are not only qualified for that role, but that you can obtain meaningful results within your deliverables in that job. If you're currently in your job search process, please make sure to give my account a follow. I post videos about resumes, interviews, job search hacks, and just my overall opinion about the job market. I would love to see you back again. And please share this video with someone who you think this might help. Thanks for stopping by, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.